Hello and welcome back to When Sunday Comes, a podcast that aims to get into the heart of women's football and hosted by myself, Graham Falk. Today's guest takes us back to Scotland for the first time in a couple of episodes, and we will be making a slight stop off in Scandinavia on the way, but nonetheless, I'm sure you've guessed who it is. Welcome to the show, Hearts defender / midfielder, Cailin Michie. Cailin, how are you? You all right?
I'm good, thank you, Graham. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I think for those listening, this is not our first chat, let's be honest. So if it feels like we've chatted before, that's because we have. So it's probably more of a
Did you bring along your coffee?
I did, but I didn't put any milk in. I'm trying to cut down on my milk consumption because I think I'm having too much milk, which is a bit of a weird way to start my podcast, but I've got just a standard black Americano. That's quite boring. What's yours?
Well, I've got a tea just now because my sister bought me a pocket tea advent calendar. It's very exciting. So today's a matcha green tea.
How is your sister? Is she all right?
Yeah, she's good.
I said this was going to be like a catch-up, didn't I? So, first questions first is always the same to everyone, so you know what's coming probably. But 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 8th of December. How's your morning been so far?
It's been good. Yeah, just getting a bit of lifeman done before this, so a little bit of uni work, organising stuff. We're training around, I think we have to be in just after 12, so packed up all my kit. So, yeah, it's been quite productive.
Good. For people wondering what is it you do at uni, I obviously know this, but what is it you're doing at the minute?
It's a part-time master's in public policy.
How's it going?
It's good, actually. I'm nearly done. I've got one essay due before Christmas, and after that, it's just my dissertation. When I say just my dissertation, it's probably going to be harder once I start my dissertation, but at the moment, it feels like most of it's done.
Is that a hard balance, football and a big uni
Yeah, but
degree?
it makes a big difference doing it part-time. Like sometimes it can get a bit overwhelming, but when I did my undergraduate, you almost had a full-time schedule with Hibs and the Performance Academy in the morning. So to do it a part-time master's feels a lot easier.
Good. Start with the most recent stuff. Obviously, you moved to Hearts in October officially. Got to be honest, from like obviously we've caught up once since you've moved properly, and I've watched the highlights and stuff. But it seems like you're enjoying yourself. How much are you valuing the time at Hearts at the moment?
Yeah, it's really good. I'm just excited to be back on the pitch. Getting a lot of game time, being with some really good teammates and staff, and the whole club's been so welcoming. And so it's a really supportive environment, which is what I was looking for. I'm really enjoying being able to contribute to the team and just play as much as possible, really.
I think you left Glasgow City in around the August, so then obviously you're joining Hearts in October, so a month or so out there. How did the move come about?
Well, I think that Hearts had expressed interest earlier on in the summer, but there was a lot of miscommunication, I think, going on. And at the time I was injured. So I really joined Hearts when I was black playing football. So I did a stint doing a game and doing some training with Barmere Thistle in between August and October, just when I was finishing my rehab. And then once they heard that I was fit, then they were interested in signing me. But I wouldn't say the whole process was an easy transition. But it was really nice to finally get a bit of structure in my life once I joined Hearts, and they've been really welcoming since I joined them, so it's been good.
Obviously, you've had a position change, and I think most people will remember you and see you as a right back / left back, and then you're kind of performing in sort of a midfield three at Hearts. But it's paid dividends so far. You've got a couple of goals, a couple of assists there as well. How are you finding the position?
Yeah, well, it's quite funny because I think I was slightly reluctant about Hearts' initial proposal to join because of their formation, where they're playing more often a 3-5-2. So then I think Ava was thinking, because I'm really two-footed and I've played left back in Piteå for a year in Sweden, then I would be a left wing back. But because I'm more of a full back that joins up the play rather than one that's going to knock a ball past a player and then sprint after it, then I was wondering if I would be quite isolated in a wing-back position. So when I played in a friendly with them, then we experimented doing wing-back and centre-mid. And I did grow up playing in centre midfield. And then we decided from there that centre midfield would suit me more. But it is a bit, it's a learning period each time. So each game, then we're kind of watching it back. And Ava's been really good at offering feedback and what I can improve on, because it is still a bit getting used to the shape of the team and being back in the middle of the pitch. But It's exciting to be learning that, and obviously being able to get up and down the pitch a lot more and involved in the play a lot more.
I think looking at the position itself, I've spoke to midfielders before who's made the transition to right back or left back, and they've all said, like, for some reason there's some kind of ease in which you can move from midfield to right back or left back or a full back. You've gone the other way around. Are there similarities between the positions?
I think so, in terms of building the play, especially if you drop into the role as a six, because I think as a fullback, I had a lot of expectation that I could join up with the striker or the midfielder or come back to centre back. So we had quite a lot of options. And then in midfield, it's kind of the same, except just a step further up. And of course, when fullbacks been getting increasingly involved in the game, like we had that transition where fullbacks were suddenly really part of the attacking movement and in the final third. Then it's similar in that. And because I was quite a fullback who quite liked to come inside a lot, then I often ended up, if we were in attack, being towards the centre of the pitch anyway. So there were similarities there. I remember when I played for Hibs, then Lisa Robertson was a centre midfielder, and I was saying that I used to play centre midfield at Barmere Thistle before I came to Hibs, and she said, "Oh yeah, well, I used to play fullback for Hibs, and then they moved me to the middle of the park." So in some ways, it ends up being a progression, but yeah, especially with a back three, I think you end up dropping into positions that you might be in as a fullback anyway at certain points. So I think in my style of play, in terms of linking up the pitch, then a lot of the qualities are similar.
I can't remember which game it was I watched, but there was like a couple of times where I think Georgia went through on goal a couple of times. I can't remember which game it was, and I think almost two or three of them were your sort of direct passes. So you're almost becoming like a number 10 at points from what I've seen as well. Are you enjoying kind of the setting the goal from the middle of the pitch as opposed to the wing?
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed being more involved in the play. And it is funny, it is part of this whole learning thing where each team you set up slightly differently in the midfield. So when I was used to playing in a back four, then you'd know your defensive structure. But with the midfield, sometimes, you play 2 6s and 1 10. Sometimes we do 2 6s, 2 10s, another time, you're moving around all the time. So each time I feel like I'm playing in a slightly different position. But it's just really interesting, and it's good to be able to make the most out of it when I am there in terms of linking up with Georgia or trying to get on the score sheet as well. So it's exciting.
I think the most interesting thing about Hearts is you look through the players that they brought in, and there's no doubt that Hearts have brought in, very good players. There's some, I think Emma Brownlee, Georgia, we've touched on yourself. Simpson has also came in as well. The players that have came in that have obviously made the transition fairly easily into Hearts, but it can sometimes take a while for a club to knit together like a bunch of new players that come into the team, especially when they're having a sort of a new setup and it's gone to part-time. But why do you think that the team has knitted so well? You're sitting fourth at the moment and potentially favourites to finish fourth with the way the form's been.
I think the club have been really good at getting everybody on the same wavelength in terms of what our aims are. And Ava's got a really clear vision about how she wants the team to play. And even when we're doing tactical analysis each week, her game plan is just so it makes a lot of sense. And although the game plan is kind of different each week, you know exactly what she's expecting from you. And I think that helps. And I think having these older players and more experienced players coming in means that we can demand more of the rest of the team and how the club is progressing, so that even though we've got this vision, I think it's being kind of sped up and enforced by the fact we've got players within it who really want to see it happen and have seen it materialize in different areas. So I think we're all just kind of aiming for the same thing, which is nice, and demanding high standards of each other in that way.
Touched on the league position, then obviously anything can change. We're still really early in the season, but you are fourth at present, and that's a deserved fourth place. The game against Hibs, I think for the first time in a long while, maybe Hearts went in as favourites. I spoke with a few Hibs fans who felt, this is the first time where we don't feel like the favourites at least. But the experience itself, obviously, it was 1-1, good, really good game, 8,000 fans. I think we all seen what the showcase was and kind of how many fans made it down to the stadium, although it wasn't at Tynecastle at your home ground. What was the experience like? Obviously playing at Easter Road against your former club, loads of fans, derby game.
Yeah, it was amazing. I don't think you could have set the scene any better, really. And the Hearts support were incredible. Like we saw the video after the game of when Emma scores, and they're all there with their drums doing the chanting and singing and supporting us all the way through. So that was a really good and new experience. And then obviously to play in a stadium with high quality grass pitch is great. And so yeah, I think it was interesting because we came out of that thinking, oh well, maybe we could have got more for the game. I think towards the end, you would have taken the point because Hibs were quite dominant towards the end of the game. But I think if we'd kind of played maybe the kind of football that we did in the most recent week, I feel we're making steps each game. So if we played Hibs again, in a few weeks, and I think we would even be performing a bit better. But to come away with the point is something that's really big for the club because it does secure our place or help us in the place in fourth. And it also is a completely different dynamic at Hearts being ahead of Hibs in the league table. But yeah, having the fans and support and televised and everything was amazing. But I really need to work on how loud I'm going to shout at people because you couldn't hear each other when you're on the pitch at different points. Like I was screaming at Kira Grant and telling her there was a player on her shoulder. And then as she turns around, she's like, someone needs to tell me that. And I'm like, I'm trying, like shouting as loud as I can. So a different dynamic having the fans there, but something that hopefully we can replicate again at Tynecastle, if not in other places as well.
In terms of your career, obviously now we're going to rewind all the way back to sort of childhood, and that moment you sort of first fall in love with either watching football or playing football. But what was your particular story of growing up watching football, loving football, and then your path into playing it?
Well, Hannah, my older sister, is a couple of years older than me, so anything she did, I wanted to do as well. So my dad bought her a football when she was like 4 years old and got her engaged in the football club, well, football teams at the primary school. At the time, there wasn't a girls' team, so he actually played a big role in setting up the girls' side of the game at primary school and then becoming chairman of Boroughmuir Thistle, which is now the largest girls and women's club in Edinburgh, well, in Scotland. So I kind of just wanted to chase her playing as much football as possible. So, but I was definitely watched a lot of football, like Manchester United growing up. So, was a Ronaldo fan and yeah, just wanted to play that as much as possible and got nice breakthroughs playing and getting extra training sessions through the City of Edinburgh, like Sports Academy, and then into regional squads and national teams and the National Performance Academy from there. When I went to university as well. So yeah, I gradually fell in love with the game. I played a lot of different sports like tennis as well, but found that I preferred a team sport because it was quite competitive, and with a team sport you can blame other people when things go wrong as well. So it helped my anger issues a bit.
In terms of, you mentioned Manchester United there, did you actually have a team that you supported? I know some people don't and they just prefer to go towards players these days, which is different to when I was growing up, but I'm considerably older than you, which really depresses me because I'm now 37 next year. But did you have a team that you supported when you were growing up, or was it more players that you kind of ventured to?
Yeah, it was Manchester United growing up. I think now I more watch football for the enjoyment of the game and seeing different styles. Like I find Liverpool so entertaining. But when I was younger, I don't think I would admit to watching anybody apart from Manchester United. And then my parents are from Aberdeen, so sometimes went and watched them, but I think I was more interested in the English Premier League.
In terms of women's football, I know obviously we've made massive, massive leaps over the past few years. I think, we're speaking just before the Scottish Cup final, which is going to be live on Sky Sports, which is going to create hopefully a whole different era for Scottish women's football. But there was a few players when you would have been younger that were kind of just coming to the fore. I think the likes of maybe Kim Little and stuff like that. Did you have any young Scottish players that you could look up to at the time?
Well, I definitely did look up to Kim Little and Jenny Beattie when I went along to Scotland games, and Gemma Fay also was an amazing captain of the team at the time. And then just in terms of like being able to train and play with upcoming stars, and Lizzie Arnott was a couple of years older than me, but she was often just ahead of me in each pathway in terms of in the regional squad or training in the mornings together. So her work ethic was just incredible, and she'd always be working left and right foot and wanting to improve and loving the game. So I always kind of challenged myself against her and saw her as a real role model that was more close at hand. So I was really pleased when she kind of got success for herself as well and had moved down to Manchester United and getting caps in Scotland and things, and now she's back at Rangers. But I think the big names at the time in the national team were Kim Little and Jenny Beattie. But it's been such a big change, like you say, because previously you would ask people in my generation who's your favourite player, and you'd always name a men's player. And then you go back to the clubs now, and there's a real mix of girls who can now. But it's kind of what we're saying: if you can see them and see them play, and it's advertised more, then you're more likely to know that they're there and can be female role models as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Funnily enough, I was speaking to Ailey Barber yesterday, Clang, in reference to like the visibility of stuff, and she was saying that'll be the biggest thing that comes out of Sky Sports televising games moving forward, is that the visibility is just going to be massive. And I think we talk a lot about, little girls and stuff as well. I kind of wish that, because I didn't get into women's football about 2016, and I'm classed as a veteran these days of watching women's football, but that was because I didn't have the opportunity when I was a kid. I would have had to go to the game. I didn't really have the opportunity to watch it. So we talk a lot about little girls being inspired, but little boys will watch it and it'll normalise it for them as well, if it's not already, but especially in Scotland, seeing Scottish women footballers on the telly that aren't Caroline Weir, aren't WSL players. Not to say Caroline Weir shouldn't be watched, don't get me wrong, she's probably the best Scottish women's player at the moment, but I think if they're not playing in WSL, you don't see them, and there's a lot of talent that's within Scotland at the moment, which we both know, and that'll normalise it for little boys watching these girls playing football, and they can become heroes to them, which we're seeing now at grounds sort of across the country, and then vice versa. You've also got girls are going to have an inspiration thinking this is genuinely a profession I can go and head towards in Scotland, not just if I'm good enough I can play in WSL maybe one day. So it's fab. But who was the first coach that recognised your talents? Because there's always got to be that one person that says, you're not just enjoying playing football, you're quite good at it as well.
It was quite interesting, I suppose, because in the Edinburgh environment at the time, Chris Roberts and Pauline MacDonald had been working together, and they were at one time they took the Boroughmuir Thistle first team. But also Chris Roberts was kind of part of the SFA programs to identify like younger kids into extra training sessions and sports academies, and then into development squads and things. So he was definitely a large part of the pathway growing up, and then eventually ended up signing for Hibs when he was manager there as well. But I think the stuff that I'd learned from national teams, like from Pauline MacDonald, because she was also part of the sports academy with these extra training sessions, just made a massive difference. And there was one time when I think I'd been ill, and so I'd been training at kind of 60% during, and this was probably when I was in second year at school or something, and I was quite frustrated because you can't play 100% when you're a bit under the weather. And so one training session, when I was finally fit, I was like, right, I'm just going to try and sprint as hard as I can and everything, and work as hard as I can, and then hope just accept that I'll hopefully recover. And on that day, she took me aside and was like, oh, I've noticed a really big difference in your development. And I think that was a really key moment for me, because I realized that working that extra 1% harder actually made quite a difference. And from there, I just kind of tried to take that as part of the new training ethic and work rate. And that was something she really appreciated. And she was under 15s national team coach at the time. So it was good to have her involved in that, so that she could kind of offer advice, but also be someone there for when I got selected into that team, and then started the pathway in the national team setup as well. So I don't know if she realised how big a part she played in my development, because it's just the little things, that you pick up on as a player that your coaches say. But definitely Chris Roberts and Pauline MacDonald were kind of the ones that framed and moulded how I was from kind of end of primary school into high school.
I was asking that question because you get the kind of unsung heroes, don't you, a little bit?
Yeah.
The people that don't quite realise. But obviously you've touched on I can't even say it. Boroughmuir, you know what I mean. You say it. But obviously it led towards Hibs. And I think that in terms of Scottish women's football, if you look over the past 15, 20 years longer, Glasgow City and Hibs were the two that were pushing for a long, long time, both from the academy. If you look at the amount of players, we touched on Caroline Weir before, Hibs, Lizzie on it, Hibs. You switch to Glasgow City, Joe Love, Hayley Lord has been there, but the amount of players that have came from Glasgow City and from Hibs and gone on and moved on to what they have become. And you were someone who came through Hibs at 2015, I think. How did your youth career lead you towards Hibs? Because I mean, at the time you're talking the top two clubs in Scottish women's football, so it's a big jump.
Yeah, well, I kind of reached the end of the pathway at Bournemouth, so we're in the league below, and I was playing for the women's team, but realised that I would need a step up into the Premier League, and Bournemouth didn't have a Premier League team. So then I was kind of choosing which team to go to after that, and I think it was part of the attraction of having worked with Chris before, and Pauline McDonald also had ended up working for a bit at Hibs as well, and knowing what they would expect and kind of having that supportive environment as a younger player to come into a bigger team. So that was quite attractive for me. And then also knowing that it would be potentially a bigger step up than if you were to go to a kind of mid-table team, but also one where you're surrounded by role models like Lucy Graham and Lizzie Arnott and Emma Burnley and Joelle and Kirsty Smith, like we're all there, Lisa Robertson. So yeah, it was an exciting thing to be part of, and I think yeah, it was definitely a challenging one to get your place in the team and keep it, but I suppose I learned a lot of lessons during that time. And yeah, it was funny because I signed as a midfielder for Hibs, and then I had been playing fullback at international level, and I think I had got injured, and then when I was coming back into the team, our fullback got injured, so then my first step in would be into fullback to cover for her, and then didn't manage to make it out of that position for the next few years. So I ended up being an ingrained fullback at Hibs. So that was it was quite interesting, but it's just the way it works. You take what game time you can and slot in where the team needs you, really.
So I suppose in some ways, Hibs turned you into a fullback and Hearts turned you into a midfielder.
Yeah, definitely.
The amount of names you mentioned there, it's quite interesting. You touched on Lucy Graham, WSL now, Everton. Really lovely girl. Which said Caroline Weir before, would have been slightly before you. Lizzie Arnott, first ever goal scorer for Manchester United in the Championship. Obviously, that's something that will never change for her, and that's going to be historic. Your Joelle Murrays and players like that as well. Emma Brownlee went down to Everton as well, playing WSL. Obviously, she's came back and now plays with you again at Hearts. But there's so many players there that have got that at the time were young. But you also had the mix of experience there as well. Yeah, would have had the likes of, like I said, Joelle Murray, Jenna Fife would have been there junior time as well.
Yeah.
What did you learn from players like that, and who sort of taught you the most, if I can pinpoint you to one player?
I think it was an interesting one at Hibs because you're kind of watching different people for different reasons. So, in terms of having the discipline to do your own technical practice, then I would keep on watching Lizzie Arnott. But then in terms of like being more aggressive and getting on the ball, we also had Chloe Arthur there, and I remember the first training session I had with her, and she came in and like just straight in and took the ball off me, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna actually need to be a bit more aggressive, because I think sometimes at Bournemouth so we can be quite nice to each other and be like, oh well, that's fine. So a bit of aggression from her and Lisa Robertson as well. And yeah, I think communication, I think at the time I didn't appreciate it as much, because as a younger player, you're still a bit like, you don't really like people shouting at you that much, and you kind of want a more supportive environment, or you're not really sure about. I think when you get older, you realize that you're only shouting at people to try and help them. But as a younger player, you sometimes take it as critique. But when we played, we played in training with Siobhan Hunter, she would be great at telling you where to be and when, and demanding more of you. It was just that she scared the living daylights out of me. But now I look back and I'm like, actually, I really respect her for that. And I'm kind of see myself that training sometimes at Hearts, like kind of trying to instruct people what to do. And I'm like, I wonder if I'm like the bad cop in the team, or becoming that one. We'll see.
I found it quite funny because when I first went to Glasgow City and obviously watched you in training, I totally had you marked incorrectly. I'll be honest. I thought you'd be like quite quiet, someone who's like, quite, I wouldn't say quiet, but like, on the pitch, you did your job, you went about with no fuss, but you're not. You were one of the loudest on the pitch. And that became quite apparent quite early. And I'm guessing that's something that you picked up from those players you mentioned previously, and realized the importance of it to the other players in the dressing room, not just the younger players.
Yeah, but there was also a massive relief, because I definitely became louder at Glasgow City, because I was so frustrated with trying to say the right words for Swedish people. because the understanding was just so, it was just took you a second longer. And I'm trying to shout, like, we had to have a couple of meetings about what this meant in Sweden, and like trying to get the phrases correct so that we're all on the same page, same wavelength. And so then I would be like trying to instruct people, but it would either, like, if I said it in English, then it might not sit as easily. But also if I was trying to say it in Swedish, then it would take me a second longer to say it and things. And so when I came to Glasgow City, there was just this relief that whatever I said, it would be understood pretty quickly. So I was like, well, I'm never taking my voice for granted again. I'm gonna, even if I'm talking rubbish, at least everybody understands what I'm saying.
In regards to Hibs, I think people are going to be aware. We've talked about it a little bit, but you spent 4 years at Hibs on the other side, and starting as a teenager. At the time, it was Hibs in Glasgow City, yada yada, which you sort of spoke on. So you're sort of not only thrown into like a big club, which you touched on before, that's doing well, but you're thrown into one that's competitive and challenging every single season as a teenager, which is difficult. What were the biggest learning curves from that side of your first few years in football, when you were really young, about the competitive nature, sorry, of being in a title winning, cup competition winning team?
I think you quickly became aware that we weren't just going for the points, it was also the performance, because a lot of the games that we played, that you would be expected to win most of them. And then when you played Glasgow City, that was the kind of crunch game. And it's very different now in the league. You've got a lot of different teams beating different and a lot more competitiveness. But at the time, if you lost against a team that wasn't Glasgow City or even drew with them, you'd almost chucked away the league title. So when you've kind of got that dynamic, then sure, you can take the points, but you actually need to perform well to keep your place in the team as well. So it drew your attention to the fact that, like, you could win the games, but for us at that point, it wasn't just the points, it was the performance as a team and performance individually too. So that was quite interesting, I suppose. And I didn't really realize how intense it was, because you always want to win, and you just kind of assumed that this was the way football worked, that you would be like getting the points against each team and then trying to win the league and being in the Champions League as well. So it was only really when I went to Sweden where, because that league is so competitive, that if we'd won one more game, you could have been top four, and if you'd lost another game, you could have been relegated. Like, it was so tight. That was when I kind of realized that it's just a completely different dynamic, where you could draw a game and it would be okay, in terms of your league position as well. And also the fact that a lot of the players I was playing with in Sweden had never played in Champions League, because it was so tight getting into the Champions League. And I didn't realize how an amazing experience I had had as a teenager to take a Champions League place almost for granted, and just assume that you would be in every cup final, or assume you'd be like trying to get the league race. So I think at the time it was almost beneficial to be chucked straight into that environment, because it just seemed like the norm. Whilst now it's, I think on reflection, you're like, wow, that was actually a really high standard set every single week, and there was no chance, like no room to slip up.
In terms of your move to Scandinavia, I said we're going to touch on it. You have a little bit there. I think I'm pronouncing this right. Pattaya?
PTO.
PTO. Ah, there we go. Fantastic. Yeah. See, this is why I never pronounce it in my own accent, and I always make one mistake per episode. But I don't think you're the first to have made the move to Scandinavia, but you see a lot of players go to sort of Iceland, a couple of players go to Sweden. But it's always an interesting move for me, because obviously I've only been to Sweden twice. I've been to Gothenburg and Stockholm. Wonderful place, but definitely a different vibe to what we get here in Scotland, like hugely. So, you're still quite young at that point, really young, in fact. What made you make the move to Scandinavia and Sweden first and foremost? And secondly, how was the experience for you?
Well, firstly, I was looking for something different, I think, from Hibs anyway. I was trying to step up in a different way. And we'd played PTO enough friendly at the beginning of 2019. So I think they're aware of Hibs from that. And then so they offered, it just happened really quickly, as a lot of these things do. They were like, we've got flights booked. Would you like to come and visit and see what it's like? The flights are in 2 days' time. And I was just so scared, because I'd never flown by myself before, and it was 3 flights to get all the way up to the north of Sweden. But when I got there, then you barely even knew who was meeting you off the plane, and I was like, what have I done? I've just like traveled to a place I don't know. It's completely pitch black dark because it was December and it was just snow everywhere. Um, but it was just such a lovely community, and they really had a clear vision of what they wanted, and they were all about how they're selecting players based on how they're going to fit into the team. So it was quite a holistic idea, and they'd seen clips of me before, and they knew, because I thought, I was like, should I bring my boots, because I thought it would be a trial, and they're like, no, we've seen all we need to see. It's now about like us introducing you to the team and what it would be like. And it was just such an amazing environment, and something really new and exciting. And there was just, when I came back home and I had like less than a week to decide whether I would sign with them, then there just weren't, I was trying to ask my parents, like, what would be the negatives? Like, why shouldn't I go? And apart from the fact that I was only one term away from finishing university, we were like, it's okay, we can put that on hold. But it was just a no-brainer, really, from what they offered, like competitive football, top league in Sweden with a team that had won the league in 2018. So yeah, it was really exciting, and it definitely lived up to expectations when I was there. It was just unbelievable. Like, so a lot of the team traveled to be in that town anyway, because it was so far north and out the way that hardly anybody was actually from Piteå. So we almost felt like we were a whole group of foreign players. So in that way, we all had to be there for each other and be our own community. And the community was great as well. I think like it had so much support because it was kind of the talk of the town, and the women's team was bigger than the men's team, so they were kind of like it was different, being prioritized over for pitch space and all this type of thing from what it was in Scotland. And the whole Swedish league structure was a lot more supportive, where they'd provide a lot more funding and media, and just general support for players, so that it was, yeah, it was a different dynamic where it wasn't just something that was competing to be in. Of course, they've still got ways to go in terms of trying to be appreciated as much as men's teams and other sports. But it was much more common to be a women's football player, and you got a lot more respect from that as well. So yeah, it was so exciting.
Interesting you mentioned Sweden there, because I remember the first time I went to Sweden, I went on my own for a media job in Stockholm. And Stockholm, obviously being the capital city, you wouldn't expect it to be as remote and as dark and stuff like that. But I went in like winter time, and my Airbnb host had fell asleep.
Uh-huh.
So I was like stranded outside the home for like 3 hours, and my phone battery had died, because at the time it was an iPhone, of course. And yeah, I was kind of just stranded in this forest for ages. And the only way I got in, I don't know why I'm telling this story, you just reminded me of it. I knocked on the neighbor's door. The guy didn't speak a word of English, and it took me like half an hour to communicate that I was staying in the above flat, and I can't find the Airbnb host. So he just ran upstairs, banged on the door like he was going to break it down, and she eventually woke up, and I was let in, and everything was fine. But yes, I can imagine when you tell me the story about like landing there and how dark it is, and like leafy, I found Stockholm in the area I was in. It is a bit of a daunting place to be on your own, especially if your Airbnb host is not in. So thankfully you didn't have that outcome, and you got there all right. But I think another thing about that, when you're discussing about moving away, is I like moving away and going places on my own, because I think you learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about other cultures. And I'm not saying it's the right way, but I personally like to live my life that way. I imagine when you go in there for your profession, it's doubled. So what was it you learned most about yourself when you were living away from home and away from Scotland?
Yeah, it was crazy because that was the first time that I had actually left home, because I'd done university and training in Edinburgh, so it made sense. My house was kind of, or my parents' house was between everything. So I'd been living at home all that time, and then suddenly they put you in an apartment, and they were like, "Oh, you'll get your own apartment." And I said, because I was kind of expecting everybody to share, and they were like, "Oh no, all of our players have their own apartment, but you can share if you want." And I was like, "No, that's fine. I'll just." So I think everybody was a bit worried about whether I would actually be okay living on my own, but I loved it. It was so good. So I learned like the benefit of just having your own space and being able to kind of actually settle down and like understand yourself a bit more in that respect, and what you liked and disliked. Because at university in Hibs, you're just going from one training session to university and back again, and you hardly have time to actually breathe. But also, I mean, I learned how to really be more of a team player as well, because you had to be with your, like, be a kind of your community to your team as well as a player on the pitch. So at Hibs, it was completely different, where you would just turn up in your car, park in the car park, train, get back in your car and go. So within about 2 weeks of being in Sweden, I'd probably spent more time off the pitch with my teammates than I had in the whole 4 years that I was with Hibs. So, and then when you're all kind of always together and always aiming for the same thing, you realize the importance of supporting each other no matter what role you're playing in the team. So even if you're like being rested or you're rotating in and out, and sometimes you're starting and sometimes it's a different game, always doing what you can for the team, even if it's like, well, one time we were playing a really important game, and so I wrote like little notes to the team and left it on their, like left it in their little lockers, and just doing little things like that, because everybody was just so kind of unselfish in how they used their time and how they supported the team. So it was not when you're younger, I think it's sometimes like you're trying to beat your teammates in a more aggressive way, in terms of like, even sometimes you're sitting on the bench and you're kind of, hoping that someone doesn't do as well so you can get on or whatever. But in this environment, it actually taught you that if you're improving yourself for the team rather than improving yourself to beat other players within the team. So you've still got that competitive edge where you want to get a place, but you want to get a place because you're going to get the win for the team. So it was a different dynamic, and it was a different way of how to approach sports and be a team player as well as pushing yourself as well. So that was, yeah, really interesting too.
In terms of that experience, you can obviously tell how much you took from it. You can obviously tell how much you enjoyed it. And I'm pleased we've touched on it. We've never actually spoke about that before, to be fair, not at length. But you came back to Glasgow City. Scott Booth, I think, had made it aware that he tried to sign you beforehand.
Yeah.
What was it that lured you back? Because I suppose it would have been quite easy for you to stay somewhere you were enjoying, and no matter where you move, no matter what you do, even if it's to like Man City, Chelsea, whatever, there's always a risk. There's always an element of risk, no matter how exciting it may be. But what lured you back in particular about Glasgow City?
Well, I think it was a combination of push and pull factors, because at the time, because the league was so competitive, I think in hindsight, you could more easily stick it out and be like, actually, we're just going to see how the season's going to end. But Glasgow City had been quite purposeful in their approach. I think I'd only played 2 or 3 games in Sweden because our league had been delayed because of COVID to the beginning of July, I think. And they'd come in July saying, we'd like you to sign now and commit to coming in the end of this season, at the end of the year. And I was like, I can't make any decisions just now. I've barely even started here. And then a few months later down the line, then the league's more tight. And like I said, if you win one game, then you might be mid-table. And if you lose one game, you might be relegated. And if we got relegated, then the first people who would be cut would probably be foreign players, because we cost more money. So I was a bit concerned about like where your future lay in terms of the funding for the team and things. So in terms of getting certainty, you have a club who's offering you basically the same contract that you're on in Sweden, who are a top team in Scotland, who have a history of putting players into the national team, and a coach who's been watching your games whilst you're in Sweden, who approached you at Hibs, knows exactly what you're like, knows how you're going to fit into the team. So it was kind of that dynamic where you're kind of leaving an uncertain environment, but you're going to somewhere where, like, the only drawback was it was in Scotland, because I was enjoying the newness and the new culture and stuff. So I was like, realistically, if Glasgow City was in any other country, I would be jumping at the opportunity. So that doesn't seem like a good reason not to take the chance. So yeah, it was a combination of that. Like, I really trusted Scott Booth and what his vision was for me, and I appreciate managers who kind of show you that they've thought about how you're going to fit into the team and what their goal is for you, and believing that they're going to work with you to achieve that for yourself and for the team. So that was the exciting part of going back to Glasgow City. And even when I went, I tried to like not go back to Edinburgh as much as possible, because I loved having my independence in Sweden. So I was like, let's just pretend we're not in Scotland, like be treated like an international player. Yeah, but it was difficult. It was harder settling into Glasgow than it was settling into Sweden, because I don't think other people really realised that you weren't a Scottish player, that like Glasgow was completely new. I didn't know anybody there really in terms of having friends outside of football. And so I was kind of expecting the same community feel that there was in PTO. But it was also hampered by the fact that I came when like there was barely any COVID restrictions in Sweden. And I came back to Glasgow and things are getting delayed and suddenly you're in your house on your own. And it was really a much more different dynamic. And, Glasgow City also didn't have the setup in terms of coming into a changing room and meeting your team beforehand and having a chat and then maybe going for lunch afterwards. It was back to getting your car, drive there, drive back. And I think they'd been making steps to make that different before COVID, and then it kind of got delayed with that. So it was difficult to go back into that routine of not actually being able to be part of the team as much as you would have liked to.
Yeah, I think COVID was really challenging for any new player going somewhere new. We've seen a few players come, and it was like 4 months before they could play across Scotland, like from numerous different clubs without sort of pinpointing it. And disclaimer for the people listening, this is before my time at Glasgow City, so I wasn't part of this. I joined the season later. So I joined in the summer after the season. But correct me if I'm wrong, your debut for Glasgow City was against Hearts and you scored a screamer with your left foot.
Yep.
Perfect start.
Yeah, we step over and curled it into the corner. And it was funny because that was probably the first thing that Sean, who's the assistant coach at Hearts, mentioned to me when I arrived. He was like, "Can't stop thinking about that, Cailin." And I was like, "Oh yeah, me neither. It was a good day." But yeah, that was good. I've got a history of having decent debuts actually, because I scored a good goal against Forfar on my debut for Hibs, and then got an assist in Picho, and then scored for Glasgow City, and then scored for Hearts as well. So yeah, it starts off well.
I can remember this time really well, and I can, as much as people know I'm a Glasgow City fan and obviously work at Glasgow City part time, I think I can discuss this from a perspective of a really definitely outsiders and definitely neutral, because I was mainly covering all of the teams at that point. Didn't have a stake in any team, if I'm honest, apart from maybe slightly preferring Rangers because I'd see them the most. But that was the season Rangers obviously beat City 5-0 before the COVID break.
Oh yeah.
And I remember being part of all the press conferences for every club, and every conversation was changing of the guard, Rangers winning the league. Is this going to be the season? Or Glasgow City? Oh, and then they got beat 5-0 and it was like, poof, and that was it. And this is going to be that was going to be the season Glasgow City lost their title. And it was almost like an unwritten rule between the other journalists that won the press conference, because you felt like that was what they were asking all of the time. But the team itself put together like a monumental charge, beat Rangers twice at Auchenhowie, and then obviously on the final day of the season, beat Celtic once, I think, and drew the other one. You went completely unbeaten in that second half of the season. Were you aware of the noise around Rangers Celtic and what people were thinking and what people were saying within the dressing room?
I think I was a bit aware, and because I knew that it'd gotten a lot more competitive since I'd left Scotland, in terms of the league, and because of the amount of funding that Rangers had at hand, and kept on getting told things that they had now, and like how they'd made it more professional. And it was, Glasgow City don't have the luxury of having a men's team of which to draw funds from. So I think when progress is made in different clubs, they can do it very quickly. And yeah, especially with that 5-0 win, I think that maybe did put doubt into their like journalists' minds. But for us, like Glasgow City, they've just got a history of pulling out of the bag. Like it was so frustrating when I was at Hibs, because you'd have them like on their toes for the league, and then they would just each time just grind it out, and they just had this kind of focus and determination. And especially at that time, you still had Leanne Crichton, Leanne Ross, obviously you still got Haley, Lee, and Joe, who were like, we are winning this league, and we're like, okay, that works, works for us. So it was probably the most nervous and excited I'd felt in a campaign before, because at Hibs you're still trying to like focus on yourself, and I'm like, yeah, if I put in a good performance, and it's likely we're going to win. But with Glasgow City, it was like I really wanted that league title, because I was like, I'm not coming here for the first time and then like having lost out every year to the Glasgow City in the league when I was playing with Hibs. to then lose out to Rangers my first year. So it was amazing. Like it was good to see. Like we planned so well for that game when we played Rangers away, and it was great to be part of, like, to show that we were still up there. Because I think it was just like a blip on that 5-0 game, and also it was a weird time where we just lost players to Rangers, and then I couldn't play yet because I was like on international clearance type thing. So it was good to actually be involved when I could play later on in the season. But I think it was just really important for the club to show that actually it's the players that have been driving it. Like no matter what the funding situations have been, like it's just that kind of character within Glasgow City that says actually we are going to go and win the league. And like I don't think it was really proving people wrong. I don't think that was our mindset. I think it was maybe more proving ourselves right that we can still do it.
In terms of, I think you hear a lot. I've never been in a dressing room outside of interviewing someone within it. So, like, in terms of being in a dressing room environment and what people are saying and what people are thinking, a lot of the time you see something like written or something that someone said, and that people say, "Oh, pin that up in the dressing room." And I can't pinpoint one particular thing, but just touching on that feeling that was there before. Did that motivate you, or was the motivation already there? You didn't need anyone to throw any doubt or any kind of words in place? Is that just the way Glasgow City worked at that time?
Yeah, we didn't need motivation from anywhere else. Like I know I've had other managers that have said, "Oh, do you hear what that manager is saying in the press? Like, let's go and show them." And we didn't really care what the press was saying. It was just like, actually, we've got our own standards, and we're saying that Rangers game where we lost was not what a Glasgow City team should be doing. And I think I frequently referred to it, like in interviews and things when I was at Glasgow City, that there was this kind of own city standard where, regardless of what was going on outside, just being a Glasgow City player meant that you demanded something of yourself, that you didn't need the press to provoke you to do anything, or didn't need Rangers or other people's funding to be compared against. It was actually, we should have it within us no matter what else is going around. The fact that we're representing this club, that we're going to go and get the win.
Talked about you being loud on the pitch, and I think my first introduction to Cailin Michie was that game at the full-time whistle, the Rangers away game. You kind of screaming really loudly, which was caught on camera, of course, which was right next to me, definitely for about a week. But I think it's funny when you watch that back, that showed how much, not just that win, but I think how do I put it? That season in total meant maybe not just you individually, but as the team, it kind of embodied, from the outside looking in as it was at the time, what Glasgow City was all about, if that makes sense. If you can embody one sort of picture, one sort of moment, you celebrating that kind of embodied that for me. And I felt like from the outside looking in at the time, which I was the outside looking in, that was the moment for me when I was like, yeah, Glasgow City are going to win this. Did it feel like that for you?
I guess like the passion I had a lot of passion for that game and the other games coming up. And it was a mixture of kind of the relief that, we've gone and performed, and the elation of like, we're on the right track. And I think each time you get that win, you're getting a step closer to the title. So I think for when I look back at that celebration, it kind of like I think it's a shock to people, like you say, of people think I'm quite quiet, and it's because I don't show a lot of emotion when I'm on the pitch. So, people are getting riled up and it's like late in the game and it might be a tight game, but I just kind of get on and do my job. But there's a lot going on underneath in terms of willingness to play and willingness to learn and win the game. So I think that, definitely puts it into a nutshell, like how I feel about being part of any team that I'm with, in terms of trying to get the best out of everybody around me and the best out of the game. And for Glasgow City, then that was definitely replicated by a lot of my teammates. And we were all on the same wavelength in terms of how much we wanted to do our bit and achieve what we could.
Just to kind of touch on your time with Glasgow City, obviously we're talking about that season in particular. You did win the league, which I think was your first title, Scottish title, is that right? How memorable was that day for you? I remember being there, and it was the first game, just to kind of give people context who are maybe not aware of it or maybe need reminding of it. the season was played. I'd been to a lot of games that season, but on my own, because as media, I could go and cover it as a journalist, but fans weren't allowed because of COVID. That was the first game where fans came back coincidentally, and you had like it was Broadwood at the time where it was getting played because of the situation with Peters Hill, and I think it was something to do with the council. Like I say, before my time, I'm not entirely sure, but first time the fans came back, it was a case of if you win, you've won the league. You're against Rangers. You take an early lead. It's a lovely sunny day. I think it's June time. It's kind of like a Carlsberg day, if you know what I mean. But how memorable was that day for you, and what did that title win mean to you?
Yeah, it was an amazing day, and I was so glad that we got the first goal because you could sit down a little bit more in your seat. But I think it had a frustrating time at Glasgow City in terms of being like getting. I don't know whether it was the training schedule or just fitting in with everything. But I went through my whole season at PTO completely uninjured, and most of my time at Hibs completely fit. And then you get to Glasgow City, and I was ill at the beginning, which is why my debut had been delayed because I was trying to get the match fitness back, and then just hurt my MCL towards the after the Hibs match in that season. So that was me out until after summer. So it was again trying to implement what I had been doing in Sweden in terms of trying to do your bit for the team even when you can't play. So like bringing snacks to the change room and like trying to encourage people and being engaged with advising them on like if you knew different players and stuff like that. And I took a lot of learning from Leanne Ross in terms of leadership as well, because she had been, I think she was injured that game as well, because I remember we were sitting in the stand watching it. And after the goal, then she's high-fiving everybody, and like the win's as important to us as is if you were playing. And I think that was really good to feel like you're completely part of that, because it's a whole team effort through the whole season. Like you contribute in different ways at different times. So for me, it was really memorable because we had that feeling of elation on the bench just as much as if we were on the pitch. And I remember, like, you're wearing your Glasgow City shirt underneath your tracksuit because you're hoping that you're going to be on for pictures with the trophy after that. So then be 2-0 up, and I was absolutely buzzing. And then Erin Clackers is sitting near me, and she just hates people talking during the game. So if anybody was like, "Oh, this is going well," she'd be like, "Shut up." And she's like, "We need to focus on the game." Like, she almost putting her like mind power onto the pitch to urge the team to win. So when it happened, it was just amazing because it was everything that you'd hoped for. And I think like I was really hoping we'd played Hibs earlier when I had kind of injured my MCL, and if we'd won that game, then it wouldn't have mattered if we'd won against Rangers, but we drew it. And I was so gutted because I was like, I cannot deal with this anxiety of like having the league title almost within your grip all the way to the end of the season. But I had complete faith. Like that day, we just performed really well, and you had complete faith in the team when we came out and did it. It was just like a classic Glasgow City. Like, yeah, we are going to win today. We're going to win the league, and everybody else should have expected it because we did. So it was an amazing thing to be part of, and deserved for our efforts and proving ourselves right and other people wrong.
Quite funny watching that game back. I remember everyone felt the same way. Everyone, yeah, Glasgow City will win this.
Yeah.
It just felt like that. I don't know what it was. Obviously, I think Celtic had won 8-0 that day. So any drop points, I think Celtic would have won on goal difference, I think. So it was really important that we did. And I think everyone knows the final two questions that are going to come. And I'm pleased to see that you have potentially even prepared for this. But first question, toughest player you've ever faced?
Faced, I think I played against some. Like I played against Shanice van de Sanden when we played against Liverpool in a friendly, and she shortly afterwards signed for Lyon because she was flying for the Netherlands. But I didn't actually realise that it was her when I was playing. So I think even though she's like a top player I've played against, I think at the time I was just focused on my own job, so maybe didn't realise how amazing she was. But in Sweden, I definitely had a shock when I played against Olivia Shu, who now is called into the national team a lot because she was such a tricky winger. Like as a fullback, she honestly was fast, was competent on the ball. You didn't know whether she was going inside or outside. So I think she would probably be the toughest one that during the game, I was like, yeah, that was a really hard opponent. Whilst I think other games when I've played against good players and you've kind of matched them, then it hasn't, or you haven't realised how outstanding they are. I think in that particular game when I played against Olivia Hughes, she was like she dominated the game, and it was tricky. It was a hard one.
The final question. We changed it a little bit last week. We went for ultimate dream five-a-side team, but we're going to go back to our usual format of your ultimate five-a-side team. That can include you, or it doesn't have to include you. It's up to you. It can include a goalkeeper. It doesn't have to include a goalkeeper. All it has to include is players that you've played alongside.
Okay. It's quite interesting because for a five-a-side team, I would choose different goalkeepers than an 11-a-side ones, because Guro Pettersen, who's been called into the Norwegian team recently, she would catch every single aerial ball, and she was so dominant as a big Norwegian keeper. But in terms of fives, I would probably go Erin Clackers, because her reaction saves at training are just she's such a ball stopper. It's crazy. I'd have Faith Idikidi Michael in defense. She's a Nigerian. She's played 4 World Cups and 2 Olympics, and you can't get the ball off her. And she's such a solid person and player. And then I would put me in the mix, because you want to be amongst those players. So I would always put myself in the mix. I'd probably go with Erin Cuthbert. We played together internationally, so alongside me in the midfield. And then I'd probably go Fernanda da Silva, who's a Brazilian, who is in my team, and Picho, who's also in fives. You're not going to touch the ball if she's against you, and she's so strong as well. But she's kind of got that Brazilian flair, where the manager, when we were playing fives at training, would kind of warn me and be you need to watch South American players. They just play with instinct, so you can't dive in, because they don't decide what they're going to do until you make the first move, and then it's a step over here, and she's back heeling the ball into the net and stuff like that. So in terms of a five team, if you've got all of them together, I don't think the other team won't touch the ball.
Cailin, it's been really nice to catch up, not at common ground.
Yes.
And via Zoom, which I think is the first time we've ever done it. It's weird. Normally the other way around is, if I have a conversation with someone like that, that's the first time. But if it's not, it'll be another catch up via Zoom. I've maybe been in a press conference. This is the first time we've actually spoke on Zoom and not just in person, which is kind of weird, but it kind of worked, and I kind of enjoyed it.
I mean, usually we have a random meetup on a train when we accidentally end up in the same carriage or something.
That was a tough day. It worked out, you'll be pleased to know, but that was a tough day. Yeah. There'll be people listening now going well, what the hell happened? You don't need to know it was a tough day. But honestly, really lovely catching up, and I wish you luck for the rest of the season. It won't be the last time we speak, I'm sure. But thanks for coming on. I hope you enjoyed it, most importantly.
Yeah, great to catch up. Thanks, Graham.